Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about 28mm photography. I made a video in the past about how I sold my 28mm lens and it ultimately made my photography better because I couldn't reach for it anymore. I had to opt for different focal lengths and it taught me a lot. However, recently, I've gone out and bought a 28mm lens. I'm actually back shooting 28mm a little bit now, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences of returning to the focal length that was ruining my photography. And interestingly, I think on the first trip I took with it, I actually took some of my favorite photos of the year. So for those of you that don't know, the reason I ended up without a 28mm lens was because I put all of my Leica gear up for sale in a little bit of a moment of madness, and the Elmarit sold straight away, and it left me with a 35mm and a 50mm Summilux. And since then, for about 6 months now, I've been predominantly using the 50mm Summilux. So to return to 28mm then, that means I needed to buy a lens. And I don't really want this video to be a lens review, but the lens I picked up was the Voigtlander 28mm Ultron V2. Now the V1 version, the version 1 of this lens, might be my most used lens ever. I had it on my M2 4C for the best part of 4 or 5 years as my daily driver, and I was super excited to get my hands on it. To do like a quick one sentence review, optically it's amazing. I really like how it handles. I love the aperture ring. I think visually I wish it looked more like a modern lens, maybe than this like retro vibe that Voigtlander go for. But honestly, I've been really enjoying using it, and it's actually taught me a couple of things that makes me think that I actually don't want that 28mm Elmarit anymore. I think there's something else I'd like to try, and we're going to touch on that towards the end. But I don't want this to be a review, so let's jump into the 28mm focal length rather than focusing on this little lens. Now in terms of the first trip out with this lens then, I actually used up some of my remaining annual leave just before Christmas and headed into London. And the new house that we're sat in today, studio still not finished, nowhere near finished, actually makes it easier for me to get to London, and that is something I am super excited about this year. In terms of the actual trip that I went on, I did my usual like central London loop. I think I've shared it in some videos before. If you're interested, let me know down in the comments and I'll share a link with you. But yeah, it was an overcast, dull day, and whilst I was walking around sharing some pictures as I went, a few of you reached out and asked me on Instagram, how do you get like enjoyment in shooting these overcast days? Well, ultimately, a trip to London is quite a big day out for me at the time, so you kind of have to play with the cards you're dealt, right? Now, some of the things I do to kind of get the most out of an overcast day is I frequently will change the EVF or the live view, depending on what camera I'm using, to black and white. If it's a dull overcast day, just get rid of color completely and really focus in on the light element. Alternatively to this is to also look out for bright colors. Anything that is a bright color in a dull overcast day will probably stand out even more. And the third thing for me, which was super lucky on the day, was it was actually raining in the morning just before I got there. It meant there was lots of puddles and there was no real wind, so I could use a lot of reflection, something that I had a lot of fun with. And this photo in particular, I really like how it turned out. The first thing that really slapped me in the face after just taking a few photos was how much 28mm just feels natural to me. I'm sure other people have this with other focal lengths, but I can just see the world in 28mm. It's really hard to describe, but I can like visualize frames before I even move the camera up to my eye. Now, for other focal lengths, like the 50mm that I've been using for the last 6 months, I've definitely got better at it, but it still doesn't feel natural. And after having like 6 months away from 28mm, I half expected 28mm to feel odd, but it didn't. It was so obvious straight away that 28mm just feels super natural. And there's a lot to be said for a camera and lens that just feel right. And this natural framing really helped with something I like to do, especially when I'm in London, so less travel photography, maybe a little bit more street photography-esque, is zone focusing. Being able to visualize frames shooting from the hip is something that I had a lot of fun with on the day. Now with 50mm lenses, this is far harder, partly due to that shallower depth of field and also a much tighter crop. So 28mm is going to feel a little bit easier here, but the visualizing frames was just super easy and it felt natural. Now zone focusing also gave me another opportunity, specifically with the M11. The M11 is still pretty new to me and I didn't really know how far I could push the high ISO. So I found myself, especially in places like Borough Market where I was up close with people, zone focusing at a quite fast shutter speed, so maybe like 1/20th at f5.6 to f8, that sort of area, which really pushed the ISO capabilities of the M11, and it was the first time I was really able to experiment. I think the result of that is that around the 12,500 ISO point of view is the color limit for me. I find when you flick these images to black and white, they still look good because you can hide that color noise, but 12,500 is definitely that kind of point for me where things are getting a bit too noisy. And I think going forward, I'm going to try and cap my color photography at 6,400. I think that's kind of the sweet spot in terms of how far I want to push it. Now in the past, one of my big reasons for loving 28mm photography was this fear of missing out. I always had this view that if you put a 50mm lens onto my camera and I went out for a day shooting, that if there was something where I needed the extra width, I was just stuck. I was passing opportunities up. You can't make a telephoto lens wider, but you can take a wide lens, say a 28mm, and crop in to make it feel like it's a bit narrower. Now, this is the fundamental change to my approach, having had this kind of 28mm hiatus, and that is the fact that I now realize when I'm walking around with a 28mm, all of the 50mm opportunities that are passing me by. And this was something I just never recognized in the past. And now this did lead me down a path of discovering something that was quite interesting and maybe actually just confirmed something I knew before. The fact that I was running around my 28mm and kind of naturally seeing them frames whilst also observing some of the 50mm frames that I missed, I realized I never really once thought to myself, I wish I had the 35mm Summilux attached. And I think this kind of confirms things that I've said in the past. If you have to have a one camera, one lens setup, maybe 35mm is the right option. But for me personally, it will always feel like a compromise between the 28mm that feels natural with that width that my kind of eyes just visualize, and that portrait compressibility and the telephoto length of a 50. I found myself wanting 28 and 50, but never 35. And I think for me, it confirms that that is the road I want to go down. I would prefer a 2-lens setup over a 1-lens setup, and 28 and 50 is the answer. So I do think I'll be selling that 35mm Summilux. If you're wondering what all the little numbers mean down at the bottom of the images, that links to my stackable preset collection. This is an example here. You take the raw, apply basic adjustment 4 and then tone curve 7, and you end up with this image. If you want a little bit more information about them, there's a link down in the description. Now this Voigtlander did also offer me a couple things I hadn't had in the past with the Elmarit. One of those is the extra stop of speed, being f2 versus f2.8, and the other is the close focusing. This will actually go past the rangefinder limit of 70 centimeters and go down to 50. Now when it comes to close focusing, do you know what? I don't think I really got much value out of it, especially in a camera like the M11. In like the few occasions where I do want to get a little bit closer, I do find cropping is fine for me, and I don't really get much value out of that little extra distance. I also don't really like how if you're around that 70 mark that you kind of cross past the rangefinder, sometimes hard to know you've done it. The thing that did stand out though, especially when Claire came and joined me later in the evening and we went and took some photos of some Christmas lights, was the fact that f2 was super helpful. That extra stop of light, I got a lot of use out of with this lens. And I think recently, over the last few months, using just Summilux lenses, the 35 and the 50, I have come to dislike their size a little bit. I think the Elmarit might also be the other extreme. I've always spoke about in the past how I love the small size of the Elmarit, but I am starting to think that the Summicron is the sweet spot. And I said at the start of this video that maybe the Elmarit isn't the lens for me in the future, so I'm glad I didn't buy it. And I think that's because I want to try out a 28mm Summicron. Definitely not the newest variant, too expensive for me, but maybe the generation before. So in conclusion then, I really enjoyed my experience of selling the 28mm focal length. I learned so much from it, and I'm so glad it's an experience that I've lived. Having said that, I'm also super excited to have 28mm again, and this time with some fresh eyes and a bit of a change to that fear of missing out in the past. I wasn't wrong when I was saying taking a 50mm out was meaning I was missing some 28mm opportunities. The bit where I was wrong was thinking that a 28mm could just crop in all the time and I wasn't really missing anything. The reality is, every time I take a 28mm lens out, I am missing 50mm opportunities, and my eyes just see it now. The other really big thing that I think that stands out to me is just how natural 28mm feels to me. It feels natural. My eyes just kind of visualize things in 28mm. And if you've not found that focal length yet, you should definitely experiment, because it just feels like there is a really tangible value in having something that feels natural. Or if you're stuck a little bit like I was, always using the same focal length, maybe try one of these like one camera, one lens challenges on a focal length for a month that you're not used to, and just see if it opens your eyes a little bit, because I am very glad I've lived through this experience. If you've enjoyed this video though guys, please do not forget to like and subscribe. There is plenty more Fuji, Leica, travel, photography content coming to the channel very, very soon. And I can't wait to build out the studio a little bit. Get curtains or blinds would be nice, because I've noticed the kind of exposure of this video dropping as I've been talking. So yeah, bear with me, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.